Welcome to Wine Dad Wednesday. We're talking bubbles.
Hi, Dad. Can you share how bubbles are made?
Yes, I absolutely can. Such a fun history that starts way back when in France. Thought to kind of be a flaw in wine when it had kind of a sparkling effervescence. It actually has been turned into one of the most popular drinks around. Incredibly versatile. Bubbles, as we call them, or sparkling wine, is at its origin something that was first refined in France a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, and has a fascinating history. There's lots of books about it. One of my favorites is The Widow Clicquot, about Madame Ponsardin. You may know it as Veuve Clicquot. She was a woman in France who had her husband unfortunately pass away when they were newly married, but they were both from wealthy families, so it wasn't too much of a hardship. She inherited the family's winery operations and competed against Moet for what at the time was a very important Russian market that was closed off, embargoed. Then she was the first one to get her champagne when that embargo lifted, and the rest is history. She also invented a lot of really cool things that we still use today to make sparkling wine, like riddling, which is a process of working the sediment up to the cap of the bottle. So, simply, sparkling wine is when you have a fermentation that occurs and you trap the CO2 in the wine. And that can be a flaw, but you can also do it on purpose. And today, the most traditional method of making high quality sparkling, and this is what we do for the most part in Napa Valley, is we make the still wine just like we would. In this case, I'm drinking a Blanc Blanc, which is Chardonnay. So Chardonnay, we've all had Chardonnay, dry Chardonnay, meaning no bubbles and no sugar. Well, we make that wine, and then after that's been made as a still wine, we will then put it in a bottle, and we'll put a little more yeast and a little more sugar, so it has something to eat. And when it eats that sugar, just like with the normal fermentation, it creates more alcohol, but also creates CO2. Well, now that it's in a bottle, we cap it and trap that. And so that CO2 stays in the bottle and actually infuses into the liquid. So that if you do it the correct way, you get these lovely bubbles, lots of them that just never stop. And what it does is it creates this really refreshing, lively mouthfeel white wine that is incredibly versatile. It can go with the beginning of your meal. It can go with a graduation celebration, a birthday, an anniversary, happy times, weddings. Or you can pair it with your main courses. Thinking Thanksgiving, if you just want to start with champagne and roll right through the whole dinner, all the way through to dessert with that one beverage, it will play well with all of the things that are on your Thanksgiving table. And speaking of dessert, it can be dessert or it can pair well with sweet things as well as savory. So it's a very fun wine, and it's not all the same grape. We see lots of examples of sparkling that are made with Chardonnay or Pinot Noir. That's a red wine grape. And both of those are the traditional grapes primarily used when you think of champagne that comes from France. Champagne's a big fancy word, but it really is a region. Most importantly, it's a region where they make sparkling wine and they're allowed to call it champagne. Here in the Napa Valley, we're doing the same kinds of techniques that they're doing in Champagne, France, but we can't call it champagne. So sparkling wine it is. There's also different styles of sparkling wine, specifically the level of sweetness or the amount of sugar that's remaining after they finish making the wine. I prefer ones that are very dry and not that sweet. Although I've had really good sweet versions of that. And so there's a whole scale that goes from bone dry, so it's going to be tart, to sweet that would actually taste not syrupy, but certainly not bone dry. And those are, throughout history, some of the best ones out there, certainly from the old world, have a little bit of residual or remaining sugar in them, and that's just fine. It's totally acceptable. It's really just your personal preference. There's also other regions than France and Napa Valley that make sparkling. And so you can go to Italy and have Prosecco. It's delicious. There's also versions that are made a little more economically. Instead of adding that second fermentation and waiting for that to occur, you can take CO2 gas and put that right into the still wine. You'll notice when that happens because those bubbles tend to be bigger. So think like similar in process to, say, carbonated water drinks or flavor. So when you drink a Topo Chico or a LaCroix or those kinds of things, that's CO2 that's been added to the liquid. The fine bubbles that tend to last a lot longer are the ones that are in the wine from that secondary fermentation. It just is a harder process because then you've now got to take that bottle and move all that sediment that was the yeast up toward the cap of the bottle, freeze that, pop it, let that pop out, and then either add a little bit more wine back or cork it, and you're finally finished and you have a bottle of sparkling wine. So there are sparkling wines, champagnes. I can think of one that's made here in Napa Valley called Schramsberg, or Schramsberg, depending on how you like to pronounce that. They have some what they call late disgorged wines, where they wait a long time to remove that sediment, sometimes multiple years. Where the winery I'm involved in, we have a 2001 vintage that we're still letting sit and bottle. We just riddled it, or we just went through the process of working the sediment up to the cap, but it's still in there. And the thought is, even after we disgorge that sediment, we would wait maybe a few more years. And that could be from the 21 vintage, the first year that we harvested that in 21, it was a still wine that sat in barrel. And then since basically the following June of 22, it's been in bottle. And here we are, June of 24, and we're still kind of waiting around. When the Chardonnay version of that same wine was in barrel for about 11 months, and then bottled, and then later that next year, so the 22, we were pouring that wine for people. So it can be much longer for sparkling. And the idea is, because there's so much going on there, especially with the spent yeast staying in the contact with the wine, there's a lot more character that can be developed. So again, it's just a philosophical or winemaking decision based on the desire for the end result to be a certain way. Kind of fun. Explore, especially the culinary pairings that you can do. There's really very little you can do wrong with sparkling wine.